Why do good people so often lose in history? Is morality a weakness in a cruel world? Long before history was written, before kings were crowned, before wars were given names, humans were already telling stories. Stories about heroes, about the brave, about the good. And in those stories, the good almost always won. But history tells a different kind of story. History is quieter, colder, less forgiving. When we open the pages of the past, we don't meet the kind. We don't meet the merciful. We meet conquerors. We meet generals. We meet rulers who took what they wanted and left silence behind them. And somewhere between those pages, a question begins to whisper. Why? Why do the good so often disappear from history? Why are the compassionate remembered late, if they are remembered at all? Why does cruelty seem to rise faster, spread wider, and win more often? Is it because the world is broken, or because goodness was never meant to survive in it? History does not announce its values out loud, but it reveals them quietly, through who it rewards and who it forgets. The gentle philosopher is executed. The violent ruler gets a statue. The one who questions power is silenced. The one who seizes power is celebrated. And so, generation after generation, we inherit a dangerous idea that morality is weakness, that mercy is naive, that kindness has no place in a world shaped by force. But is that really true, or are we misunderstanding the game history is playing? Because history is not a moral judge. It is a record of outcomes. It doesn't ask how something was achieved, only that it was achieved. And this is where the confusion begins. Good people hesitate, they doubt, they ask questions before acting. Cruel people do not. They move faster, they decide without reflection. They take advantage of moments when others are still thinking. And history loves speed. History loves decisiveness, even when it's destructive. But does that mean cruelty is stronger, or simply louder? Look closely, and you'll notice something strange. Many of the people we now admire for their goodness were not celebrated in their time. They were mocked, ignored, imprisoned, killed. Their ideas were considered dangerous, their morality inconvenient. Socrates was executed for asking questions. Jesus was crucified for challenging power. Early reformers were burned, exiled, erased. At the time, they looked like failures. History moved on without them, or so it seemed, because history has a habit of changing its mind, slowly. The cruel often win quickly, the good often win late, and sometimes they don't win at all, at least not in the way history measures victory, which leads us to a deeper, more uncomfortable thought. What if goodness was never designed to win power? What if it was designed to preserve humanity? History remembers empires, but it is built on people. Empires rise fast, they collapse faster, and when they fall, what remains is not the cruelty that built them, but the ideas that challenged them. Kindness does not conquer territory. It does something far more fragile. It changes people, and people change history. Not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly, from the inside out. Yet this kind of change is slow. Too slow for history books, too subtle for monuments. So we miss it. We mistake silence for defeat. We mistake patience for weakness. And we ask the wrong question. We ask, why do good people lose? When perhaps we should be asking, lose what? Power? Yes, often. Control? Usually. But humanity? That answer is far less certain, because every time cruelty wins, it must rely on fear to survive. And fear is exhausting. Goodness, on the other hand, does not demand obedience. It invites reflection, and reflection is dangerous, not to people, but to systems built on force. So history does what it always does. It crowns the conqueror, it records the battle, it moves on, and only later, Much later does it begin to feel the absence of those who could have ruled through mercy, the absence of paths not taken. This video is not here to glorify weakness, and it is not here to romanticize suffering. It is here to ask a harder question. In a world that rewards cruelty, why does morality refuse to disappear? Why does every generation, despite knowing the cost, continue to believe that goodness matters? Maybe because morality was never meant to win history. Maybe it was meant to save us from becoming it. History never asks, how was this result achieved? It asks only one question: who remained? Morality is not history's measure. Conscience is not its currency. History does not vote for good or evil. It records results. When an empire collapses, history does not ask how many children died. When land is taken, history does not ask who was displaced. When power is secured, history does not ask what fear it was built upon. History simply writes, "This happened." Morality speaks in another language. It asks what should have happened. History loves what happened. That is why history books are filled with victors. How they won is often written in smaller letters, or not written at all, because morality measures the process. History measures the outcome. Morality asks, was it just? Was it necessary? Was it human? History replies, there was a victory. There was a defeat. There were survivors, and there were those erased. And history always sides with those who remain. This leads us to an uncomfortable truth. Good people often appear incomplete in history because good people pause. They reflect. They question themselves. Cruel people do not. They act without hesitation. They move faster. They reach outcomes while others are still thinking. And history favors speed. History favors decisiveness, even when it is destructive. But this does not mean cruelty is stronger. It only means it is louder. History records what can be seen: crowns, borders, monuments. Morality carries what cannot be seen: trauma, loss, guilt, restraint. History sees the sword. Morality sees the wound that remains after it is gone. History sees the throne. Morality sees those crushed beneath it. History chooses winners. Morality chooses humanity. And perhaps this is the real problem. We expect answers from history, but history does not know how to ask questions. Morality is a question, an open one, never fully answered. History chooses its winners by outcome, not by morality, but humanity continues to insist on morality anyway. And perhaps that insistence itself is the greatest victory history can never record. Why is the good person slow? The good person is slow not because they are weak, but because they are aware. Speed belongs to those who feel no weight, and goodness is heavy. A good person does not move through the world lightly. Every step carries consequences. Every decision echoes beyond the moment it is made. Before acting, the good person asks questions that slow everything down. Who will this hurt? What will remain after this choice? Am I solving a problem or creating a quieter one? Cruel people do not ask these questions. They don't need to. Cruelty simplifies the world. It reduces complexity into targets. It turns humans into obstacles and obstacles into things to be removed. Goodness does the opposite. It restores complexity. The good person sees faces where others see crowds. They see futures where others see opportunity. They see moral weight where others see efficiency. And this awareness creates friction. The good person hesitates, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Hesitation is often mistaken for indecision, but in reality, it is restraint. And restraint is slow. History, however, does not value restraint. History values momentum. History rewards those who move first, strike hardest, and leave no time for doubt. The good person rarely does that, because the good person understands something that history refuses to acknowledge: that not every action that is possible is permissible, that not every victory is worth its cost. And so the good person pauses. They pause at the moment when others rush forward. They pause when silence would be safer. They pause when obedience would be easier. And in that pause, they lose time. Time that cruelty uses mercilessly. Cruelty thrives on urgency. It tells the world, act now or lose everything. It creates false emergencies where reflection becomes a liability. Goodness does not respond well to urgency. It needs space. Space to think, space to doubt, space to imagine alternatives. And space is dangerous in a world built on competition. The good person is slow because they refuse to treat people as expendable. They do not see efficiency as the highest virtue. They do not confuse speed with progress. They know that something done quickly can be undone slowly, through regret, guilt, and trauma. History rarely records those costs, but the good person carries them anyway. This is why goodness looks impractical from a distance. It does not scale easily. It does not dominate. It does not overwhelm. It persuades. It listens. It waits. And waiting looks like weakness to those who measure worth by conquest. But slowness has a hidden power. It allows mistakes to be noticed before they become irreversible. It allows violence to be questioned before it becomes tradition. It allows humanity to survive moments that would otherwise destroy it. The good person is slow because they understand that speed is often the enemy of wisdom. History loves speed because speed produces outcomes, but outcomes are not the same as meaning. A decision made quickly can change borders. A decision made slowly can change people. History celebrates the first. Humanity depends on the second. And this is why good people so often appear to lose. They arrive late to power, late to recognition, late to victory, if they arrive at all. But they arrive early to conscience, early to regret, early to understanding that some paths, once taken, cannot be undone. Cruelty runs, goodness walks, and in a world obsessed with arrival, we forget to ask where we are going. The good person is slow because they are not racing to win history. They are trying not to lose themselves. And that may be the slowest decision of all, but it is also the most human one. History often remembers conquerors, but it rarely remembers those who stood in their way. Bartolomé de las Casas was one of those people. He did not lead an army. He did not conquer land. He did not build an empire. He did something far more dangerous. He told the truth to people who benefited from lies. Las Casas arrived in the New World as many others did, not as a hero, but as part of the system. He was a Spanish settler, a priest, at first even a beneficiary of colonization. He saw the land. He saw the gold. He saw the system that treated native people not as humans, but as tools. And for a time, he said nothing. Then he began to watch more closely. He saw entire villages disappear. He saw forced labor disguised as civilization. He saw conversions at sword point called salvation. Men worked until their bodies collapsed. Women were taken. Children died quietly. And the justification was always the same. This is necessary. This is progress. This is God's will. Las Casas could have looked away. Most did. Instead, something changed. He realized that the greatest violence was not the sword, but the lie that made the sword acceptable. Las Casas gave up his land. He freed the indigenous people under his control, and he began to write. Not poetry, not theory, testimony. He described massacres in brutal detail, not to shock, but to force recognition. He wrote that the native peoples were rational, capable of thought, capable of faith, capable of humanity. This was a radical idea in the 16th century because the entire colonial system depended on one assumption, that the conquered were less than human. Las Casas attacked that assumption directly. He traveled back to Spain again and again. He spoke to kings, to councils, to theologians. He said something unthinkable for his time, that Spain's empire was built on sin, that its wealth was soaked in blood, that no moral victory could come from genocide. He argued that forced conversion was meaningless, that faith born of terror was not faith at all, that conquest destroyed souls, both of the conquered and the conquerors. For a moment it seemed like he was being heard. New laws were passed, protections were promised, debates were held. History likes to pause here and call this a victory, but reality was quieter. The laws were ignored. The protections were undermined. The system adjusted but did not change, because Las Casas had made a fatal mistake. He appealed to morality in a system driven by profit. He asked for restraint in a world built on extraction, and history does not move easily when money is at stake. Las Casas became inconvenient. He was labeled naive, idealistic, impractical. He was told he did not understand reality, but he understood it too well. He understood that cruelty could be efficient, that genocide could be profitable, that morality was slow and empire was fast. And so, history sidelined him, not with execution, not with imprisonment, but with neglect. His writings survived. His warnings survived, but his impact was diluted. Spain continued its conquest. The New World continued to bleed, and Las Casas lived long enough to see that his words changed very little. This is how good people are defeated in history, not dramatically, but gradually. Their arguments are acknowledged, then postponed. Their concerns are praised, then ignored. They are celebrated in theory and defeated in practice. Las Casas did not fail because he was wrong. He failed because the world he challenged was not ready to stop benefiting from injustice. And yet, centuries later, we still read him, we still quote him, we still recognize that he saw something others refused to see. He understood that progress without morality is just organized violence, that empire without conscience is theft with paperwork. Las Casas lost his battle in his lifetime, but he planted a dangerous idea that no civilization can call itself great while destroying the humanity of others. History did not reward him with victory. It rewarded him with obscurity, but humanity rewarded him differently, by remembering him when we finally learn to be ashamed of what he tried to stop. And perhaps this is the quiet truth history never likes to admit. Good people do not lose because they are weak. They lose because they refuse to become what the world rewards. Bartolomé de las Casas did not change his century, but he changed how future centuries would judge it. And that may be the only kind of victory goodness ever gets. History remembers Baybars as a warrior, a Mamluk sultan, a general, a man of iron discipline and relentless strength. Statues, chronicles, and textbooks place a sword in his hand and stop there. But that is not who Baybars truly was. That image is convenient, because history prefers men who conquer over men who restrain themselves after conquering. Baybars rose from slavery, not metaphorically, literally. He was sold as a child, trained as property, used as a tool of war. Most men who rise from such a beginning carry only one lesson forward: power protects. Baybars could have become nothing more than another brutal ruler repeating the cycle. Instead, something unexpected happened. Baybars understood suffering not as theory, but as memory. He had lived without protection, without status, without mercy, and that shaped the way he ruled. Yes, Baybars fought wars. He faced the Mongols. He confronted the Crusaders. He defended a region on the brink of annihilation. But what history rarely pauses to mention is what he did after victory. Baybars did not rule through chaos. He ruled through structure. He rebuilt cities devastated by war. He restored irrigation systems. He reopened trade routes that fed ordinary people. He understood that conquest without stability was not strength. It was delay. While many rulers saw civilians as expendable, Baybars placed limits on violence. He punished soldiers who abused local populations. He enforced laws protecting merchants, farmers, and travelers. He understood that fear destroys loyalty, and loyalty, unlike fear, endures. Baybars invested in justice systems that did not depend entirely on the ruler's whim. Courts functioned. Judges were empowered. The law was not perfect, but it existed. For a medieval ruler, this mattered. He also understood something rare among conquerors, that legitimacy does not come only from force. Baybars sponsored education. He supported scholars. He preserved institutions that carried knowledge forward while much of the region lay in ruins. He did not erase cultures he ruled over. He absorbed them. And perhaps most importantly, he knew when not to destroy. Cities that surrendered were spared. Civilians were protected when possible. Negotiation was used where slaughter was expected. These choices do not fit comfortably into the heroic war narratives history prefers, because restraint is quiet, because mercy leaves fewer dramatic scenes behind. Baybars was not gentle. Let us be honest. He was a man of his time, a time where survival demanded hardness. But within that hardness, he carved space for order, protection, and continuity. And that is where history grows uncomfortable, because Baybars complicates the story. He was a warrior who understood the cost of endless war. He was a ruler who knew that authority without justice collapses. He was a former slave who refused to build his empire entirely on the humiliation of others. So why is this side of Baybars rarely discussed? Because history likes simplicity. It prefers heroes or villains, not contradictions. It prefers clear violence over complex restraint. Baybars is easier to remember as a sword than as a system builder, and so his mercy is footnoted, his governance minimized, his restraint overshadowed by his victories. This is how good people are lost in history, not because they lacked power, but because they used it carefully. History celebrates those who destroy dramatically. It forgets those who prevent collapse quietly. Baybars did not rule forever, no one does. But the structures he built outlived him. The stability he created allowed societies to recover. And yet, when his name is spoken, we hear only steel. This is not an accident. History is more comfortable with violence than with responsibility, because responsibility forces us to ask harder questions. What could have been avoided? Who was protected? Who chose not to destroy? Baybars al-Bundukdari was not perfect, but he understood something essential, that true strength is not measured by how much you can destroy, but by how much you choose not to. History did not erase him, but it simplified him, and in doing so, it lost the most important lesson he had to offer, that even in the harshest world, power can choose restraint. And restraint, though rarely celebrated, is often what saves civilizations from themselves. History often celebrates those who change the world by force. It rarely celebrates those who challenge it with ideas. Pierre Bayle was not a revolutionary with a weapon. He was something far more dangerous. A man who believed that no one should be punished for their beliefs. In an age where religion decided who lived, who belonged, and who deserved to die, this idea was explosive. Bayle lived in the 17th century, a Europe torn apart by religious wars, Catholics and Protestants killing one another not for land, not for wealth, but for certainty. Everyone believed they owned the truth, and anyone who disagreed was seen as a threat to society itself. Bayle refused to accept this logic. He asked a question so simple that it terrified everyone who heard it. What if a person can be morally good, even if their beliefs are wrong? This question struck at the heart of power, because if morality does not depend on belief, then authority loses its excuse to persecute. Bayle argued that conscience is sacred. that forcing belief creates hypocrisy, not faith, that violence in the name of truth destroys truth itself. These ideas sound reasonable today. In his time, they were considered dangerous. Bale himself knew persecution firsthand. Born a Protestant in Catholic France, he was forced into exile. He lost his position. He lost his homeland. He lived as a refugee for his ideas. And yet, he did not respond with bitterness. He wrote. His most famous work, the Historical and Critical Dictionary, was not a simple reference book. It was a weapon, but a quiet one. Page by page, Bale questioned authority, exposed contradictions, and showed how often certainty leads to cruelty. He did something radical. He defended the right of people to be wrong, not because error is good, but because coercion is worse. Bale argued that a society of diverse beliefs could be more moral than a society united by fear. This idea threatened everyone. Religious leaders feared losing control. Political leaders feared losing obedience. Even fellow philosophers hesitated. Tolerance sounded noble, but it seemed impractical. How could a society survive if it allowed disagreement? Bale's answer was calm and devastating, because persecution creates more chaos than difference ever could. But history was not ready to listen. Bale was respected in private and ignored in practice. His ideas circulated quietly. They influenced thinkers who came later, Locke, Voltaire, the Enlightenment. But Bale himself remained in the shadows. He did not lead a movement. He did not see reform in his lifetime. He did not witness tolerance become law. This is how good people often lose in history, not because they are wrong, but because they are early. Bale was asking for a world that did not yet exist, a world where disagreement is not treason, where belief is personal, not enforced, where morality is measured by actions, not doctrines. History prefers loud change. Bale offered quiet truth. History prefers heroes who break chains. Bale asked why the chains existed at all, so he was footnoted, referenced, rarely remembered. Yet almost everything we now take for granted, freedom of conscience, religious tolerance, the separation of belief and punishment, rests on ideas Bale defended when defending them was dangerous. Pierre Bale did not win his century, but he shaped the centuries that followed. And this is perhaps the most painful irony of history. The people who make the world more humane are often invisible to it. Bale did not conquer territory. He did not overthrow regimes. He simply insisted that no one should suffer for thinking differently. History did not reward him, but every time tolerance survives violence, every time disagreement does not end in blood, his quiet victory repeats itself. Pierre Bale was not ignored because he lacked courage. He was ignored because his ideas asked humanity to grow up. And history is always slow to mature. History usually remembers generals in times of crisis. Xu Guangqi believed something different, that in the long run, knowledge saves more lives than swords. Xu Guangqi lived during the late Ming Dynasty, a time of deep instability. China was facing famine, corruption, floods, and the slow collapse of an empire. Most officials fought for power. Xu Guangqi fought for solutions. He was a scholar, a statesman, but more importantly, a pragmatist with conscience. Xu Guangqi believed that learning had one purpose: to reduce suffering, not to impress elites, not to decorate courts, but to feed people, heal people, and protect society. This idea alone put him at odds with his time. Xu Guangqi studied astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and engineering. But unlike many scholars, he refused to keep knowledge locked inside elite circles. He asked dangerous questions. Why should advanced farming techniques remain hidden in books while people starve? Why should science serve prestige instead of survival? Xu Guangqi worked relentlessly to improve agriculture. He documented crops, tested soil, introduced new farming methods, promoted irrigation systems that could prevent famine. He believed that a government that cannot feed its people has already failed morally. This sounds obvious today. In his time, it was radical, because scholars were expected to debate philosophy, not get their hands dirty in fields. Xu Guangqi did both. He also believed in openness to foreign knowledge. When European science entered China through Jesuit scholars, many officials rejected it outright. Foreign ideas were seen as threats to tradition. Xu Guangqi disagreed. He collaborated with Matteo Ricci to translate Western scientific texts into Chinese. He helped introduce accurate astronomy, mathematics, and calendar reform. Not because the West was superior, but because truth was useful, regardless of where it came from. This made him suspicious to many. Traditionalists saw him as disloyal. Reformers saw him as too cautious. Religious factions distrusted him. Xu Guangqi stood alone, between worlds. He believed that cultures could learn from one another without losing themselves. That science and ethics were not enemies of tradition, but its continuation. And perhaps most importantly, Xu Guangqi believed that moral governance required evidence, not slogans. When floods destroyed harvests, he didn't offer prayers alone. He offered engineering. When people starved, he didn't debate metaphysics. He changed farming methods. But history did not reward this approach. Xu Guangqi did not lead a rebellion. He did not seize power. He did not create dramatic moments for historians to admire. He worked slowly, systematically, quietly. And quiet reform rarely survives in historical memory. After his death, many of his projects were abandoned. Political infighting returned. The Ming dynasty fell, and Xu Guangqi's name faded, not because he failed, but because his kind of success was invisible. You cannot easily dramatize a famine that never happened. You cannot celebrate a rebellion that was avoided. History prefers collapse to prevention. It prefers tragedy to stability. Xu Guangqi represented a dangerous idea, that good governance is not heroic, it is competent. That morality is not loud, it is effective. That wisdom is not dominance, it is care. He did not try to save history. He tried to save people. And history rarely thanks those who choose people over legacy. Today, when we speak of science serving society, of evidence-based policy, of practical ethics, we are echoing ideas Xu Guangqi lived by centuries ago. But his name remains unfamiliar to most, because once again, history chose drama over decency, collapse over care, and power over quiet goodness. Xu Guangqi did not lose because he was wrong. He lost because the world he served collapsed faster than wisdom could spread. And yet, every time knowledge is used to reduce suffering instead of control, his forgotten victory quietly continues. History often remembers heroes who survive. Janusz Korczak is remembered for something far harder. He chose not to. Korczak was not a soldier. He was not a politician. He was not a man of power. He was a doctor, a writer, an educator, and above all, he was someone who believed that children are not future humans. They are humans now. Long before the world collapsed into war, Korczak was already fighting a quiet battle. He fought against humiliation, against fear-based education, against the idea that children exist to be controlled. In his orphanages, children had rights. They had courts. They had voices. They had dignity. This alone made him unusual. But history was about to test him in the cruelest way imaginable. When Nazi Germany occupied Poland, Korczak was running a Jewish orphanage in Warsaw. Food disappeared. Space disappeared. Hope disappeared. The Warsaw ghetto closed in. Children starved slowly. Disease spread quietly. Fear became constant. Korczak could have escaped. This is important. He had offers, papers, connections. He could have survived. Many begged him to leave. He refused, because to Korczak, saving himself while abandoning the children was not survival. It was betrayal. He stayed. He rationed food he didn't have. He comforted children he could not save. He told stories at night to make hunger quieter. He refused to lie to them, but he refused to terrify them either. When the order came to deport the orphanage to Treblinka, Korczak did not panic. Witnesses described the scene. Children lined up in pairs, clean clothes, calm faces. Korczak walked at the front, not crying, not shouting, holding their hands. Some guards recognized him. They knew who he was. One last chance was offered. He could step out of line. He did not. He entered the train with the children. And that is where history usually stops. Because history does not know what to do with choices like this. There is no victory to celebrate, no enemy defeated, no outcome that looks like success. Just a man who refused to abandon his principles, even when it cost him his life. So history footnotes him, mentions him briefly, moves on. But Korczak's decision raises a question that history hates. What if the highest form of morality is not survival? What if sometimes doing the right thing means accepting loss? Korczak did not die because he was powerless. He died because he used his power differently. He used it to stay, to protect dignity when protection was impossible, to prove that humanity does not end when circumstances do. He could not save the children's lives, but he saved something else. Their final moments were not filled with chaos. They were filled with presence, with care, with a familiar voice. History prefers heroes who live to tell the story. Korczak chose to be the story, and that is why he is uncomfortable, because he forces us to ask, what would we have done? Would we choose life at the cost of abandoning others? Or would we choose presence when presence is all that remains? Janusz Korczak did not change the course of history, but he exposed its limits. He showed that morality does not exist to win. It exists to remain human when winning is impossible. History did not reward him, but humanity cannot forget him without losing something essential. Korczak did not survive the century, but he survived in the only way that truly matters, by proving that even in the darkest place on earth, a human being can still say, I will not leave them, and mean it. History is uneasy with mercy, because mercy interrupts momentum, it slows decisions, it delays outcomes. And history loves speed. Mercy means stopping. History wants to move forward, even when it does not know where it is going. When someone chooses mercy, they do not only spare another person, they challenge the entire system. They ask dangerous questions. What if we don't destroy? What if we don't punish? What if not everyone is an enemy? History does not like these questions, because history is built on commands. Mercy does not obey commands. Power says, strike, eliminate. Silence. Mercy says, wait, listen, understand. And that pause is often interpreted as weakness. In history, mercy is risky because it disrupts power. When a general spares the defeated, soldiers become uncertain. When a ruler forgives, systems built on fear begin to shake. Fear-based order survives only through fear. Mercy weakens that foundation. It introduces a dangerous possibility that control without violence might exist. And that possibility threatens every regime built on coercion. This is why merciful leaders are often called weak, why those who forgive are labeled naive, why those who hesitate are accused of betrayal. Mercy humanizes the enemy, and history prefers enemies without faces. An enemy without humanity can be killed without hesitation. An enemy with humanity creates doubt. Doubt slows violence, and history does not tolerate slowness. To maintain momentum, history rewrites its language. Enemies become savages, traitors, threats. Mercy destroys this language, and history is governed by language as much as by force. But there is a deeper reason mercy is so dangerous. Mercy offers no guaranteed result. Cruelty promises speed. Act now, win now. Mercy promises uncertainty. Act now, and maybe nothing will change. History prefers certainty. Morality lives with doubt. History counts victories. Mercy leaves traces, and traces are often invisible. A war that never happened does not make history books. A massacre that was prevented has no monument. History struggles to record what did not occur, but mercy is built precisely on what did not happen, on lives not taken, on suffering avoided, on violence restrained. To history, this looks like nothing, and so mercy disappears from the record. This is why mercy is rare in history, not because people lacked compassion, but because compassion does not translate into immediate, visible success. History celebrates destruction. It forgets preservation. Yet there is a paradox. History may treat mercy as a risk, but humanity cannot survive without it. After every atrocity, after every collapse, humanity asks the same question: was it worth it? That question is mercy returning too late. History may ignore mercy in the moment, but memory carries it. Mercy does not exist to win history. It exists to limit damage, to remind us that power without restraint eventually consumes itself. History may distrust mercy because it threatens efficiency, but mercy threatens something deeper, the belief that violence is inevitable. And that belief is the foundation of most historical catastrophes. Mercy is risky because it reveals another way, a slower way, a quieter way, a way without guarantees. And history, which is written by outcomes, has always feared possibilities. Socrates never wrote a book, he never built an army, he never ruled a city, and yet Athens feared him, not because he was violent, but because he refused to stop asking questions. Socrates walked the streets of Athens speaking to ordinary people, soldiers, politicians, merchants, young men full of confidence, and to all of them he asked the same quiet, dangerous thing: what do you really know? Athens was proud of itself. It called itself the birthplace of democracy, reason, and wisdom. Socrates exposed the cracks beneath that pride. He showed that those who claimed to know the most often understood the least. That power rested not on wisdom, but on confidence without self-doubt. This made him unbearable, because a society can survive cruelty, it can survive corruption, but it struggles to survive self-examination. Socrates did not attack the state directly. He attacked its certainty. He taught that wisdom begins with admitting ignorance, that morality must be questioned constantly, that obedience without understanding is dangerous. For this, he was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. But the real charge was simpler. He made people uncomfortable. When offered exile, Socrates refused, not because he wanted to die, but because leaving would mean admitting guilt. And Socrates believed that living unjustly was worse than dying. So he drank the poison. Athens survived. Socrates died. History calls this a tragedy, but it was also a warning, because Socrates did not lose because he was wrong. He lost because truth spoken without compromise is intolerable to power. Athens killed him, then built its philosophy on his ideas. This is how history treats good people. It silences them first, then quotes them forever. Jesus did not come as a conqueror. He did not raise an army. He did not seize institutions. He did not call for revolution. And yet, the Roman Empire executed him. Jesus spoke about mercy in a world governed by fear. He spoke about forgiveness in a system built on punishment. He treated the poor, the sick, the outcast as if they mattered. This alone was dangerous. But what truly threatened power was not what Jesus said. It was how he lived. He refused hierarchy. He refused retaliation. He refused to define enemies the way empires do. He said the powerful were not closer to God, that wealth was not virtue, that obedience without compassion was hollow. For Rome, this was unacceptable. Empires survive on clear lines: ruler and ruled, strong and weak, punisher and punished. Jesus erased those lines. He turned the other cheek. He forgave publicly. He refused violence even in self-defense. Mercy in an empire looks like rebellion. Jesus was executed not because he failed, but because his way of life exposed how fragile power really was. Crucifixion was meant to humiliate, to erase, to warn. Instead, it preserved him. History did what it always does. It killed the man, then turned his message into an institution. Jesus lost his life, but his morality outlived empires. And still, history struggles with him because his teachings remain inconvenient. They do not promise victory. They do not promise security. They ask for transformation. And history has never been comfortable with transformation that begins inside. Mandela is often remembered as a success story, a smiling man, a peaceful transition, a symbol of reconciliation. But history simplifies him. For most of his life, Mandela was not celebrated. He was imprisoned. For 27 years, he lost his youth, his family, his health, all because he believed that apartheid was morally unacceptable. Mandela could have emerged from prison bitter, vengeful, justified in cruelty. Many expected him to. Instead, he chose reconciliation. This decision shocked the world, not because mercy is admirable, but because it is rare after suffering. Mandela understood something history often forgets, that revenge creates temporary justice and permanent wounds. He chose dialogue where violence was expected, and for once, history did not punish mercy. But notice something important. Mandela's mercy succeeded only after decades of resistance, international pressure, and the collapse of the old system. Mercy alone did not win. It arrived after the conditions changed. Mandela is the exception that proves the rule. History allowed mercy only when power had already shifted, and even then, the cost was enormous. Mandela did not lose in the end, but he paid the price early, and that is the pattern. Socrates, Jesus, Mandela. Good people do not fail because morality is weak. They fail because morality moves slower than violence. Sometimes history catches up. Often it does not. But without them, history would be nothing more than a record of domination. They remind us that even when goodness loses, it leaves behind something power never can: a standard. And history, no matter how cruel, is eventually judged by it. Why mercy looks like weakness. Mercy often appears to be weakness, not because it lacks strength, but because it gives the other side a choice. Mercy does not command. It does not force. It does not close the door. It leaves the door open, and an open door is dangerous to history because mercy introduces uncertainty. It allows the other person to choose differently, to change, to regret, to refuse violence. History does not like uncertainty. History prefers control. Cruelty, by contrast, leaves no choice. Cruelty says, obey, submit, or be destroyed. There is no hesitation here, no freedom, no moral ambiguity, and paradoxically, this clarity is often mistaken for strength, because when no choice is given, no responsibility is shared. Cruel systems are efficient systems. Orders flow downward, violence flows outward, and guilt dissolves into obedience. Mercy disrupts this machinery. The moment a choice is offered, everyone becomes accountable. The one who forgives takes a risk. The one who is forgiven must confront themselves. And those who witness it begin to ask if another path was possible. Why did we choose violence before? This question is poisonous to power, because history is built on continuity. Violence creates predictable outcomes. Fear produces obedience. Obedience produces order. Mercy breaks this chain. It suggests something deeply threatening. That order might exist without fear, and any system built on fear cannot tolerate that idea. This is why mercy has so often been punished in history, not because it failed, but because it destabilized the foundations of authority. A merciful ruler creates doubt among soldiers. A forgiving judge weakens the image of absolute law. A compassionate teacher disrupts blind obedience. Because mercy tells people, think, choose, take responsibility. History prefers subjects who do not think. History prefers certainty over conscience. This is why those who offered mercy were often accused of weakness, naivety, or betrayal. Mercy humanizes the enemy, and history prefers enemies without faces. An enemy without humanity can be killed without hesitation. An enemy with humanity creates friction, and friction slows violence. History despises slowness. To preserve momentum, history rewrites language. Enemies become savages, traitors, threats. Mercy destroys this language, and history, more than anything else, is ruled by language. But there is an even deeper reason why mercy is so dangerous. Mercy offers no guaranteed outcome. Cruelty promises immediacy. Act now, control now, win now. Mercy offers uncertainty. Act now, and nothing may change. History values certainty. Morality lives with doubt. History counts victories. Mercy leaves traces, and traces are often invisible. A war that never happens does not appear in history books. A massacre that was prevented has no monument. History struggles to record what did not occur. But mercy is built entirely on what did not happen. Lives not taken, suffering avoided, violence restrained. To history, this looks like absence, and absence is easy to ignore. This is why mercy appears weak, not because it lacks power, but because its power does not announce itself. Cruelty creates spectacle, mercy creates silence, and history prefers noise. Yet there is a paradox. After every atrocity, after every collapse, humanity asks the same question: was it worth it? That question is mercy returning. Too late. History may punish mercy in the moment, but memory slowly rehabilitates it, because power built without restraint eventually consumes itself. Mercy does not exist to win history. It exists to limit damage, to remind us that not every possible act is a necessary one. Mercy is risky because it reveals an alternative, a slower path, a quieter path, a path without guarantees. And history, which is written by outcomes, has always feared possibilities. Cruelty wins in the short term because it is simple. It simplifies decisions. It simplifies people. It simplifies the world. And history loves simplicity. Cruelty does not debate. It does not hesitate. It does not question itself. It offers a single solution to every problem: eliminate the source. This solution is attractive to power because it saves time. Morality takes time. Mercy takes time. Understanding takes time. Cruelty gains time by destroying what takes time. That is why short-term victories in history are so often built on cruelty, because cruelty creates fear, and fear is the fastest tool of control ever discovered. Love persuades slowly. Fear commands instantly. History knows this. When a ruler spreads fear, thinking stops. When an army terrifies, resistance collapses. When a system is built on fear, it functions immediately. But functioning is not the same as living. Cruelty wins quickly because it removes responsibility. In cruel systems, no one feels guilty. There is an order, there is obedience, there is a victim, but there is no conscience. This accelerates everything, because conscience is the greatest brake on human action. Conscience asks, is this right? Is this necessary? What will this do in the long run? Cruelty silences these questions, and history moves faster when questions disappear. Cruelty also wins quickly because it produces visible results. If a rebellion is crushed, history calls it success. If a population is silenced, it becomes stability. If an enemy is destroyed, it is labeled security. History is fascinated by outcomes. It is indifferent to methods. How many were killed? What trauma was created? What future violence was planted? These are postponed questions. Cruelty operates in the present tense, but cruelty's most powerful weapon is psychological. It tells people, you did not choose this. You are not responsible. You are only following orders. This is comforting. Choice is heavy. Responsibility is painful. Cruelty lifts that burden, and throughout history, many have accepted that relief. Cruelty wins in the short term because it destroys alternatives. As long as alternatives exist, people think. When alternatives are erased, people obey. History often confuses obedience with order. But order built on fear is fragile, because fear requires constant energy, constant surveillance, constant pressure, constant violence. Over time, this consumes the system from within. History rarely records this erosion. It records collapse. Cruelty wins quickly because its calculations are short. It does not plan for memory. It does not account for resentment. It ignores the human interior. But humans do not forget. Fear silences voices, but memory survives. Every cruel victory plants the seed of future resistance. History later calls this unexpected unrest. In reality, it is delayed consequence. Mercy works slowly. Morality matures over time. Humanization requires patience. Cruelty is fast, but speed does not equal direction. History loves sprints. Humanity survives marathons. Cruelty wins in the short term because history itself is short-sighted. But there is something longer than history, human memory. And every cruel victory eventually faces that memory's judgment. History may reward cruelty first, then struggle to explain it later. And perhaps the real question is not, why does cruelty win? But why do we keep choosing short-term victory over long-term humanity? This question is not really about history. It is about us. Because history does not make choices. History only records the choices we make. We choose short-term victories because they are immediately felt. A victory brings instant relief. The threat seems neutralized. Control feels restored. The human mind craves this feeling. We are creatures that flee from fear. Short-term victory silences fear quickly. Long-term humanity asks us to live with fear longer. Humanity requires patience, restraint, the ability to wait without guarantees. Victory, on the other hand, says, it's over now. You are safe now. You have won. That word, now, is intoxicating because the future is uncertain. Long-term humanity offers no promises. It does not guarantee success. It does not assure survival. It does not even promise that goodness will be rewarded. It only asks one thing: remain human, and that is a heavy burden. Short-term victory lightens that burden. It tells us it was necessary. There was no other way. Anyone would have done the same. These phrases soothe the conscience, because being justified often feels easier than being humane. Throughout history, we have chosen this comfort again and again. When societies feel threatened, they sacrifice freedom for security. When leaders feel cornered, they sacrifice justice for control. When communities face hardship, they sacrifice humanity for power. Because power works immediately. Humanity works slowly. Humanity rarely produces instant results. Its effects appear years later, or sometimes never visibly at all. And this leads us to a deeper truth. We choose short-term victories because we think in terms of history, not in terms of humanity. History shows us winners. Humanity is invisible. History builds monuments. Humanity leaves no statues. History says, look, this one prevailed. Humanity whispers, but what did it cost us? And too often, we choose not to listen to whispers, because whispers come late. They are uncomfortable. They force us to look backward. Short-term victory looks forward. Long-term humanity looks inward. And looking inward is one of the hardest things humans do. Inside, there are questions. Was there truly no other path? Was what we gained worth what we lost? Did winning make us better or just stronger? These questions destabilize victory, so we postpone them. History helps us postpone them because history is written with events, not with regrets. But human memory does not work that way. It is built on feelings, not dates. Short-term victories live in history books. Long-term humanity lives or dies inside people. And perhaps the most painful answer to this question is this. We choose short-term victories because we usually understand the value of humanity only after it has been damaged. History remembers who won. Humanity remembers who we became. And very often that realization comes too late. There are names in history that defeat cities before armies ever arrive. Genghis Khan was one of those names. His greatest weapon was not the sword, not numbers, not even strategy. It was fear. And this fear was not accidental. It was deliberate, calculated, systematic. Genghis Khan understood something most rulers learn too late. The most expensive victory is the one you have to fight for. The cheapest victory is the one that surrenders before battle begins. To achieve that, one city had to be destroyed. But destroyed so completely that the story would travel farther than any army could march. When Mongol forces approached a city, the message was simple: surrender. At first, this sounded merciful, but behind it was an unspoken condition. If the city surrendered, the population lived. The city remained standing, daily life continued. If the city resisted, it was erased. Age, gender, innocence did not matter. Even memory was meant to vanish. This was not a choice. It was a psychological mechanism. A few cities were annihilated so thoroughly that chroniclers struggled to describe it. The purpose was not chaos. It was communication. Fear travels faster than soldiers. One destroyed city meant 10 surrendered cities. One massacre eliminated countless future battles. This is why cruelty works in the short term. Fear shuts down thinking. It replaces courage with survival instinct. When people are afraid, they do not ask what is right. They ask how to stay alive. Genghis Khan understood that most people are not heroes. They do not dream of martyrdom. They want to live. And fear, when it reaches that instinct, is brutally effective. This is how the Mongol Empire expanded with astonishing speed. Its borders were drawn not only on maps, but inside the minds of those it approached. Yet this cruelty was not random. Here lies the uncomfortable complexity. Genghis Khan was not only cruel, he was rational. Cities that surrendered were spared. Trade routes were protected. Merchants were encouraged. Law was enforced. Fear created obedience. Obedience created order. And order, even when born of terror, looks like success in history books. But success built on fear has a hidden cost. Fear does not create loyalty. It creates silence. And silence is not stability. It is tension without voice. The Mongol system worked as long as fear remained personal, as long as Genghis Khan lived. After his death, the empire began to fracture, because fear does not inherit well. It does not pass cleanly from one generation to the next. Fear depends on presence, on reputation, on immediacy. Once that presence fades, so does obedience. History writes the first half loudly: unprecedented conquest, unmatched expansion, unstoppable force. The second half is quieter: fragmentation, internal conflict, collapse. This is the paradox of cruelty. It wins fast because it touches the deepest human instinct, fear of death. but it loses slowly because it builds nothing that can endure. Genghis Khan remains one of history's most effective conquerors, but the price of that effectiveness was immense. Erased cities, broken cultures, severed memories. History often lists the victories. It footnotes the cost. Because history admires speed, morality asks about damage. Genghis Khan achieved obedience, but obedience is not belief. He built an empire that moved quickly, but rested on terror, not trust. And terror, no matter how powerful, is always temporary. This is the lesson cruelty teaches us again and again. It wins the moment, it dominates the present, it terrifies the future into submission. But it cannot sustain a human world. History records its triumphs first, its consequences later. And every time, the pattern repeats. Cruelty conquers quickly and leaves behind a silence that eventually demands to be broken. Julius Caesar is often remembered as a brilliant general, a master strategist, a man who reshaped Rome, but history rarely pauses to examine how quickly his power expanded and why. Caesar understood something fundamental about control. Mercy can be admired, but fear is obeyed. During the Gallic Wars, Caesar faced dozens of tribes. Some resisted, some negotiated, some rebelled after surrender. Caesar responded selectively. He did not destroy everyone. He destroyed enough. Entire tribes were wiped out. Cities were burned. Survivors were enslaved. And then Caesar wrote about it. This is crucial. In commentaries on the Gallic War, Caesar did not hide his actions. He framed them as necessity. Punishment, he argued, was not cruelty. It was instruction. One destroyed city was meant to educate 10 others, and it worked. News traveled faster than legions. Tribes that heard of Caesar's reprisals chose submission over resistance, negotiation over rebellion, silence over defiance. This is exemplary cruelty, not random violence, but violence designed to be seen. Caesar understood psychology. Fear does not require constant force. It requires a convincing example. Once that example is established, obedience becomes automatic. Rome gained territory rapidly. Supply lines stabilized. Resistance collapsed. From a historical perspective, this looked like success, but cruelty was not limited to foreign wars. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he made another calculated choice. He marched on Rome. This act alone was illegal, but Caesar knew legality moves slower than momentum. Opposition dissolved, senators fled, institutions froze. Why? Because fear again replaced debate. People did not ask, "Is this right?" They asked, "Who will survive?" Caesar offered clemency to rivals, but only after demonstrating that resistance was futile. This is another form of cruelty. Mercy given from a position of terror is not mercy. It is confirmation of power. In the short term, this strategy worked flawlessly. Caesar centralized authority, ended civil chaos, temporarily restored order on his terms. History often praises this phase, but cruelty, even when disciplined, carries delayed consequences. Caesar's rule depended on his presence, on his reputation, on the memory of what happened to those who resisted him. Once that presence disappeared, so did restraint. The Senate killed him not because he failed, but because fear eventually turns inward. Cruelty creates obedience, but it also creates resentment. And resentment does not disappear, it waits. Caesar won quickly because he understood the mechanics of fear. He lost eventually because fear cannot build legitimacy. Rome did not become stable, it became fragile. Civil wars followed, violence escalated, power concentrated further. Caesar's short-term victories accelerated Rome's transformation, but at the cost of its republican soul. History remembers his brilliance. It often forgets the price, because history records outcomes, not tensions. Caesar demonstrates a recurring pattern. Cruelty wins fast because it simplifies choices, obey or suffer. That clarity feels like order, but it is not peace. It is silence enforced by memory of pain, and silence never lasts forever. Julius Caesar mastered the art of short-term control, but control is not the same as consent. And empires built on fear must constantly outrun their own shadows. History admired Caesar's speed, but humanity paid for it in instability. And that is why cruelty so often wins early and loses late. Joseph Stalin did not conquer the world with speed. He conquered it with fear that never slept. Unlike conquerors who relied on spectacular violence, Stalin perfected something more enduring: permanent terror. His cruelty was not chaotic, it was administrative, documented, bureaucratic, and that made it terrifyingly effective. Stalin understood a truth many rulers sense instinctively: fear does not need to be loud to be absolute. In the Soviet Union, fear was invisible but omnipresent. People did not need to see executions. They needed only to know that someone had disappeared: a neighbor, a colleague, a friend. No explanation, no appeal, no return. This uncertainty was the system. Stalin did not merely punish opposition. He erased the concept of safety itself. Anyone could be guilty at any time, for any reason, or for no reason at all. This is why cruelty worked so well in the short term, because it destroyed trust. When trust collapses, resistance collapses with it. People stop organizing, stop speaking, stop thinking aloud. Survival becomes the only ideology. Stalin's purges eliminated rivals, but more importantly, they eliminated alternatives. No competing visions, no moral counterweights, no courage that could gather momentum. Fear fragmented society into isolated individuals, and isolated individuals are easy to control. The Great Purge was not simply mass murder. It was psychological architecture. Confessions were forced, trials were staged, lies became official truth. Reality itself was reshaped. When cruelty controls truth, morality loses language. People learned not to ask whether something was right. They asked only whether it was safe to repeat. In the short term, this created what history often calls stability. There were no mass uprisings, no visible opposition, no open rebellion. From the outside, the system looked strong, but this strength was artificial. It required constant pressure, constant surveillance, constant violence. Terror must be renewed daily, or it fades. Stalin understood this and escalated accordingly. Millions died not because they rebelled, but because terror requires victims to remain convincing. Cruelty here did not react to threats, it created them. Enemies were invented to justify the system that destroyed them. And again, in the short term, it worked. Stalin consolidated power absolutely. The state moved quickly. Decisions faced no moral resistance. Fear replaced debate. History often misreads this as efficiency, but efficiency without humanity is simply accelerated damage. The long-term cost was devastating. Creativity died. Truth vanished. Trust became impossible. The system survived Stalin, but it was hollow. Once terror eased, everything it had suppressed returned at once. Resentment, anger, memory. The Soviet Union did not collapse overnight, but it never healed. Because cruelty does not educate, it conditions. It teaches obedience, not loyalty, silence, not belief. Joseph Stalin demonstrates the purest form of why cruelty wins in the short term. Because fear can override conscience. Because terror can replace choice. Because survival instincts are stronger than moral instincts, temporarily. But temporarily is the key word. Cruelty cannot build a future. It can only delay collapse. Stalin ruled for decades, but he ruled over people who were emotionally exiled from their own lives. When the fear finally loosened its grip, nothing solid remained beneath it. History may record Stalin as a powerful leader, But power sustained by terror is not strength. It is pressure. And pressure, no matter how absolute, eventually seeks release. Joseph Stalin won control quickly and lost humanity permanently. And that is the hidden defeat behind every cruel victory history first applauds. Adolf Hitler, speed through manufactured enemies. Hitler did not rise slowly. He rose violently fast. Germany in the 1930s was wounded, economically, politically, psychologically. Hitler understood that fear alone is not enough. Fear needs a direction. So he created enemies, not real ones, but useful ones. Jews, communists, intellectuals, the disabled, the impure. By naming enemies, Hitler simplified reality. Complex problems became moral absolutes. Economic failure became betrayal. Social anxiety became conspiracy. Cruelty worked here because it offered clarity. People did not need to think. They needed only to hate. Once enemies were defined, violence felt justified. Opposition disappeared quickly. Institutions collapsed silently. Laws were replaced by loyalty. Fear plus propaganda equals speed. Within years, Hitler achieved total control. History often calls this mass manipulation. But manipulation alone does not work without terror. The camps were not only for punishment, they were messages. They said, "This is what happens to those who don't belong." Short-term result, total obedience, rapid militarization. A nation mobilized without moral friction, cruelty won fast, but it hollowed everything. Once violence became normal, nothing remained sacred. The system fed on itself, and when defeat came, it came absolutely. Hitler's cruelty achieved speed and guaranteed annihilation. Napoleon Bonaparte, order enforced by fear. Napoleon is remembered as a reformer, a lawgiver, a modernizer, but his stability was built on controlled brutality. After the French Revolution, France was exhausted. Napoleon promised order, but order to him meant silence. Rebellions were crushed with artillery. Cities were punished publicly. Dissent was treated as disease. Napoleon understood something essential. People accept cruelty if it comes wrapped in efficiency. He did not terrorize indiscriminately. He terrorized strategically. One uprising destroyed, prevented 10 more. Short-term result, France stabilized, bureaucracy functioned, armies moved without hesitation. History praises this phase, but the cruelty had consequences. Napoleon's empire depended on constant expansion. Fear required renewal. Every victory demanded another war. Eventually, the system collapsed under its own momentum. Napoleon won order quickly, but lost legitimacy slowly, and legitimacy, once gone, cannot be conquered back. Qin Shi Huang, unity through erasure. Qin Shi Huang achieved something extraordinary. He unified China, but he did it by destroying memory. Books were burned. Philosophers were executed. Alternative thought was erased. This was not random cruelty. It was ideological. Qin Shi Huang believed that unity required one truth, and one truth requires no competition. Fear silenced debate. Debate silenced diversity. Diversity silenced humanity. Short-term result, immediate unification. Standardized laws, currency, language, centralized power. History celebrates this achievement, but the cost was immense. When thought disappears, adaptation disappears. The empire collapsed shortly after his death, because fear can unify bodies, but not minds. Qin Shi Huang won unity quickly by erasing alternatives, but erased alternatives return as chaos. Do good people really lose? This question sounds simple, but it carries a heavy weight, because anyone who asks it is not questioning history. They are questioning themselves. If good people always lose, what is the point of being good? If mercy is punished, why choose compassion at all? At first glance, history seems to give a clear answer. The ruthless win. The merciful are silenced, imprisoned, or killed. And if they are remembered at all, it is usually much later. But here lies the problem. What does losing actually mean? History defines loss in only one way: power. Who ruled? Who conquered? Who remained standing? Good people rarely compete in that game. They operate by a different measure. For them, victory is not domination. It is not survival at any cost. It is not the destruction of others. Victory for them is not becoming someone they cannot live with. This is where history and humanity part ways. History worships outcomes. Humanity remembers consequences. History says, "Look who won." Humanity asks, "And what did it turn them into?" Good people often appear to lose because they refuse fast victories. They do not rule through fear. They do not silence through violence. They do not win by breaking others. They choose restraint, and restraint is slow. History is a sprint. Goodness is a marathon. In a sprint, the marathon runner always looks weak. But life is not a sprint. Good people often lose power. That is true. But they preserve something far more fragile: their humanity. And that preservation does not show up in timelines or monuments. History records Socrates' execution. It cannot measure the conscience he awakened. History records Jesus on the cross. It cannot count the hearts reshaped by forgiveness. History records Mandela's imprisonment. It struggles to explain how his refusal of revenge saved a nation from tearing itself apart. Good people do not lose. They win differently. But that kind of victory has two problems. First, it is slow. Second, it is quiet. And history does not listen to quiet things. When a city is destroyed, history pays attention. When a city is spared, it often goes unnoticed. Massacres are recorded. Massacres that never happen leave no trace. Yet goodness lives precisely in what did not happen. The executions that were refused, the wars that were avoided, the hatred that was interrupted. Good people seem invisible to history because they prevent disasters instead of creating spectacles. History remembers explosions, not restraint. That is why good people appear to lose. But again, we must ask, what is loss? If losing means keeping your humanity when everything pushes you to abandon it, then perhaps good people do not lose at all. Perhaps those who truly lose are the ones who win power by sacrificing who they are. History is full of winners remembered with fear, shame, or horror. Good people are remembered less often, but more deeply. They do not build statues, they change the measure. They leave us with a question more powerful than any victory. Who would I choose to be in that moment? That question outlives empires. History may end. Human conscience does not. Good people appear to lose because they are not playing for history. They are playing for humanity. And humanity never wins immediately. But when it does win, it does not need to apologize. Maybe good people do not lose. Maybe we are simply looking for victory in the wrong place. History points to thrones. Goodness holds up a mirror, and looking into that mirror has always been harder than sitting on a throne. Can morality become power? At first, the question feels naive. Power and morality seem to live in different worlds. Power dominates, morality restrains. Power takes, morality hesitates. Power wins quickly. Morality asks whether winning is worth it. History has trained us to believe that morality and power are opposites. That to gain power, one must abandon ethics. That to remain moral, one must accept weakness. But this belief itself is a historical illusion, because morality does become power, just not the kind history recognizes immediately. The problem is not that morality lacks strength. The problem is that we measure strength incorrectly. History measures power by visibility, armies, territories, thrones, commands obeyed without question. Morality does not announce itself this way. It does not conquer space. It shapes time. Morality works slowly because it works inside people, and anything that works inside people cannot be forced. This is why morality appears weak. It refuses speed. It refuses shortcuts. It refuses to win at any cost. But here is the deeper truth. Power that depends on fear must constantly renew fear. Power that depends on morality builds internal commitment. Fear-based power collapses the moment fear weakens. Moral power remains even when authority disappears. History gives us countless examples of power that evaporated overnight. Regimes that fell, empires that dissolved, leaders whose statues were torn down. But moral influence, when it exists, outlives institutions. Socrates had no army, yet centuries later, we still measure thinking against him. Jesus had no state, yet his moral language reshaped civilizations. Mandela emerged from prison without weapons and disarmed a nation's hatred. These were not accidents. Morality became power because it transformed how people understood legitimacy. Power asks, "Can I force you?" Morality asks, "Will you consent?" Force is faster. Consent is stronger. A system built on force requires constant pressure. A system built on moral legitimacy requires belief. Belief cannot be imposed. But once established, it is extraordinarily resilient. This is why moral power is often invisible while it is forming. It does not create spectacle. It creates alignment. And alignment does not look dramatic. It looks like patience, like restraint, like refusal to become what you oppose. History mistakes this for weakness, but weakness does not endure. Morality does. However, morality does not automatically become power. This is the mistake idealists make. Moral intention alone is not enough. Morality becomes power only when it is consistent, when it survives pressure, when it resists retaliation, when it remains intact under loss. This is why moral power is rare. Most people are moral only when it is safe. The moment morality costs something, status, safety, victory, many abandon it. True moral power emerges only when ethics remain firm, even when cruelty would be easier. That is when morality stops being opinion and becomes authority. Because people notice consistency. They may not follow it immediately, but they remember it. And memory is power delayed. Morality also becomes power when it redefines success. Cruelty wins by redefining success as dominance. Morality wins by redefining success as preservation, not conquest, continuity, not control, coexistence, not fear, trust. This is a different kind of victory, one that cannot be measured by borders or casualty counts, but it can be measured by whether societies remain human. Morality is the only force that limits power without destroying it. Without morality, power consumes itself. Every cruel system eventually collapses under its own violence, because violence must escalate to remain effective. Morality interrupts that escalation. It introduces a ceiling. It says, "This far and no further." That sentence alone has prevented more destruction than any army ever could. History rarely records restraint. It records catastrophe. But restraint is what allows humanity to continue at all. So can morality become power? Yes, but not immediate power, not visible power, not theatrical power. It becomes structural power. It shapes norms. It defines limits. It determines what is acceptable long after rulers are gone. Moral power is slow because it is foundational. It does not replace force overnight. It outlasts it. This is why history often mocks morality until history itself collapses. Then morality reappears as the only thing capable of rebuilding trust. Every post-war reconstruction, every reconciliation process, every attempt to heal collective trauma depends on moral authority, not military strength. Force can end a conflict. Only morality can end a cycle. That is its true power. So morality does not fail to become power. Ashoka, when conquest collapses into conscience. Ashoka began as everything history celebrates: a conqueror, a unifier, a ruler who expanded territory through force. Early in his reign, Ashoka ruled as history expects rulers to rule, through violence. The Kalinga War changed everything. It was a military success. The enemy was crushed. The land was taken. By historical standards, Ashoka won. But when the war ended, Ashoka did something almost unheard of for a conqueror. He looked at the cost. Thousands dead, cities destroyed, families erased. And instead of celebrating victory, he felt remorse. This moment is crucial. Most rulers suppress remorse. Ashoka allowed it to transform him. He understood something radical. Conquest secures land, but it destroys legitimacy. From this realization emerged a new idea of power. Ashoka abandoned expansion through violence. He embraced Dhamma, a moral philosophy emphasizing non-violence, tolerance, compassion, restraint. This was not symbolic. Ashoka rewrote governance itself. He built hospitals instead of fortresses. He sent moral envoys instead of armies. He protected religious diversity. He institutionalized mercy. And here is the paradox. Ashoka's empire became more stable after he renounced cruelty, because fear creates obedience, but legitimacy creates loyalty. Ashoka discovered that morality could govern where terror could only dominate. History often overlooks this phase because it lacks spectacle. But Ashoka's moral turn outlived his conquests. His empire faded. His ethical legacy spread across Asia. Morality did not make Ashoka weak. It made him enduring. Nelson Mandela, after prison, moral authority as political power. Nelson Mandela's greatness did not begin with victory. It began with loss. 27 years in prison was meant to break him. It did not. When Mandela emerged, history expected revenge. The system had brutalized him. The state had humiliated him. The country was on the brink of civil war. Mandela had every justification to answer cruelty with cruelty. Instead, he chose restraint. This choice confused everyone. Former oppressors expected punishment. Former allies expected retaliation. Mandela offered neither. He offered reconciliation. This was not weakness. It was a calculated moral strategy. Mandela understood that South Africa could win politically and lose humanly. Revenge would satisfy pain, but it would destroy the future. So Mandela redefined power. Power was no longer domination of enemies. It became the refusal to create new ones. Truth and reconciliation replaced trials. Forgiveness replaced purges. And something extraordinary happened. Those who feared Mandela began to trust him, because morality, when consistent, creates legitimacy no army can enforce. Mandela did not disarm the nation with weapons. He disarmed it morally, that is power. His authority did not come from fear, it came from credibility. He proved that restraint after suffering is the strongest signal a leader can send. Mandela did not erase injustice. He prevented endless retaliation, and in doing so, he turned morality into the foundation of the state. Ashoka, when conquest collapses into conscience. Ashoka began as everything history celebrates: a conqueror, a unifier, a ruler who expanded territory through force. Early in his reign, Ashoka ruled as history expects rulers to rule, through violence. The Kalinga War changed everything. It was a military success. The enemy was crushed. The land was taken. By historical standards, Ashoka won. But when the war ended, Ashoka did something almost unheard of for a conqueror. He looked at the cost. Thousands dead, cities destroyed, families erased. And instead of celebrating victory, he felt remorse. This moment is crucial. Most rulers suppress remorse. Ashoka allowed it to transform him. He understood something radical. Conquest secures land, but it destroys legitimacy. From this realization emerged a new idea of power. Ashoka abandoned expansion through violence. He embraced Dhamma, a moral philosophy emphasizing non-violence, tolerance, compassion, restraint. This was not symbolic. Ashoka rewrote governance itself. He built hospitals instead of fortresses. He sent moral envoys instead of armies. He protected religious diversity. He institutionalized mercy. And here is the paradox. Ashoka's empire became more stable after he renounced cruelty, because fear creates obedience, but legitimacy creates loyalty. Ashoka discovered that morality could govern where terror could only dominate. History often overlooks this phase because it lacks spectacle. But Ashoka's moral turn outlived his conquests. His empire faded. His ethical legacy spread across Asia. Morality did not make Ashoka weak. It made him enduring. Nelson Mandela, after prison, moral authority as political power. Nelson Mandela's greatness did not begin with victory. It began with loss. 27 years in prison was meant to break him. It did not. When Mandela emerged, history expected revenge. The system had brutalized him. The state had humiliated him. The country was on the brink of civil war. Mandela had every justification to answer cruelty with cruelty. Instead, he chose restraint. This choice confused everyone. Former oppressors expected punishment. Former allies expected retaliation. Mandela offered neither. He offered reconciliation. This was not weakness. It was a calculated moral strategy. Mandela understood that South Africa could win politically and lose humanly. Revenge would satisfy pain, but it would destroy the future. So Mandela redefined power. Power was no longer domination of enemies. It became the refusal to create new ones. Truth and reconciliation replaced trials. Forgiveness replaced purges. And something extraordinary happened. Those who feared Mandela began to trust him, because morality, when consistent, creates legitimacy no army can enforce. Mandela did not disarm the nation with weapons. He disarmed it morally, that is power. His authority did not come from fear, it came from credibility. He proved that restraint after suffering is the strongest signal a leader can send. Mandela did not erase injustice. He prevented endless retaliation, and in doing so, he turned morality into the foundation of the state. Mikhail Gorbachev, moral restraint that ended an empire. Gorbachev inherited power at a moment when cruelty was still available. He could have used tanks. He could have crushed dissent. History had shown him how. But Gorbachev saw something others ignored. The Soviet Union was powerful and empty. Fear sustained it. Violence preserved it. But belief was gone. Gorbachev chose a path history had rarely rewarded. He refused mass violence. Perestroika and glasnost were moral decisions disguised as political reforms. Transparency, dialogue, limits on force. These ideas weakened control, but restored honesty. When Eastern Europe began to break free, Gorbachev faced a familiar choice: tanks or restraint. He chose restraint. The Soviet Empire collapsed. History often calls this failure, but here is the deeper truth. For the first time in modern history, an empire fell without millions dying in its collapse. Gorbachev sacrificed power to prevent bloodshed. That sacrifice was moral, and morality here became a different kind of power. The power to stop violence even when violence is available. Gorbachev was not rewarded politically, but humanity was. He proved that moral restraint can end systems of fear without replacing them with massacre. That is power history struggles to recognize. The common thread: Ashoka, Mandela, Gorbachev. 3 different eras, 3 different systems, 1 shared truth. Morality becomes power when it replaces fear with legitimacy. Fear forces obedience. Morality earns consent. Fear builds silence. Morality builds trust. Fear wins quickly, morality lasts longer. History records speed, humanity survives duration. These men lost something visible: territory, vengeance, empire, but they gained something rarer, a future that did not require endless violence. Morality did not make them saints. It made them structural forces, and that is the kind of power history notices only later. When morality became power, the people history. Underestimated history often rewards speed. Morality works with patience. That is why moral power almost always arrives late, and why it is so often misunderstood. The following figures were not weak. They were dangerous in a different way. They proved that power does not only flow from fear, it can also emerge from restraint. Abraham Lincoln, mercy after total war. Lincoln led one of the bloodiest wars in American history. He won absolutely, but when victory arrived, he refused revenge. Instead of humiliation, he offered reconciliation, with malice toward none, with charity for all. This choice angered radicals. It confused generals. It terrified those who wanted punishment. But Lincoln understood something crucial. A nation held together by revenge would eventually tear itself apart. His moral restraint after victory became the foundation of national legitimacy. Lincoln's morality did not win the war, but it prevented endless war after victory. Václav Havel, truth as a weapon. Havel had no army, no police, no party machine. He had truth. By refusing to live within lies, he exposed the fragility of authoritarian power. His morality did not confront the regime directly. It made the regime absurd. When people stopped pretending, the system collapsed quietly. Havel proved that morality can become power when it strips fear of its legitimacy. Lech Wałęsa, courage without violence. Wałęsa led workers, not soldiers. The Polish communist system expected violence. It prepared for repression. What it faced instead was moral persistence. By refusing armed conflict, Wałęsa denied the regime its excuse. Fear could not justify brutality against peaceful resistance. Morality here became power by forcing the state into moral exposure. Martin Luther King Jr. Pressure without hatred. King never controlled institutions, but he controlled moral language. By refusing violence, he transformed brutality into evidence. Each act of repression strengthened his cause. Morality did not defeat racism overnight, but it made racism indefensible. King showed that power can emerge when injustice is forced to reveal itself. Desmond Tutu, healing as authority. Tutu had no legal power, yet he guided a nation through its darkest reckoning. By choosing truth over punishment, he prevented South Africa from collapsing into revenge. Forgiveness here was not softness. It was strategic moral containment. Without it, the country might not exist today. George Washington, power given up. Washington could have ruled indefinitely. He did not. By stepping down voluntarily, he created something unprecedented: power restrained by morality. This act shaped democratic norms more than any law ever could. His greatest power was the power he refused to keep. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, ending violence with structure. Ataturk emerged from war, not peace, but instead of eternal conflict, he chose institution building. He redirected force into modernization. His moral choice was pragmatic: end the cycle. Morality here was not softness, it was survival through rational restraint. Cyrus the Great, tolerance as imperial strategy. Cyrus ruled through inclusion. He allowed religions to survive, cultures to continue, people to belong. His empire lasted because it did not erase identities. Morality here became power by reducing resistance. Akbar, diversity as strength. Akbar understood that violence fractures empires, tolerance unified them. By embracing pluralism, he stabilized one of history's most complex states. Morality did not weaken his rule, it extended it. The pattern history misses. All these figures share something rare. They refused immediate gratification. They sacrificed speed, revenge, domination. In exchange, they gained legitimacy, durability, moral authority. Fear creates obedience. Morality creates alignment. Fear wins first. Morality lasts longer. History notices speed. Humanity survives duration. Why does history remember good people late? History does not like silence. History prefers noise, explosions, bloodshed, collapse, because history is written through events, and events are usually violent. Good people, however, rarely create events. They prevent them. And history has never known how to record what did not happen. This is the first reason good people are remembered late. Goodness works slowly. Cruelty acts instantly. One order, one decision, and thousands of lives change. Goodness requires patience, consistency, the courage to repeat the same values even when nothing seems to change. History is impatient. It looks for immediate results. Goodness works for outcomes that appear much later, sometimes after the person is gone. To history, delay looks like failure. This makes good people invisible in their own time. History remembers good people late because goodness is quiet. When a city is destroyed, history records it. When a city is spared, there is often nothing to write down. When a war begins, history opens a chapter. When a war is prevented, history stays silent. Yet goodness lives precisely in these invisible moments. Executions that never happened, revenge that was refused, hatred that was interrupted. History cannot measure absence, but absence is where goodness resides. History also remembers good people late, because history speaks the language of winners. Winning is usually defined by power, territory, authority, control. Good people often reject these measures. Their victories are not about domination, but about preservation. History asks, who won? Goodness answers, who was not destroyed? That answer does not fit history's framework. History remembers good people late because goodness threatens systems. Cruelty stabilizes systems through fear. Fear produces obedience. Goodness destabilizes systems by introducing questions. A good person asks, is this necessary? Is there another way? What is the human cost? These questions are dangerous. They weaken absolute authority. History is often written by those in power, and power does not like to be questioned. Good people disrupt power without trying to seize it, so history pushes them to the margins. Another reason good people are remembered late is that goodness must be repeated. Cruelty needs only one moment to be recorded. Goodness requires years of consistency. History loves explosions. It ignores endurance. But here lies the paradox. Although history remembers good people late, it does not forget them. It only needs time. Cruel rulers shine brightly and burn out quickly. Good people glow quietly and leave deeper traces. History first records cruelty, then spends centuries explaining its consequences. And during that explanation, good people reappear. Because the inevitable question arises, could this have been done differently? The answer is often found in the lives of those who chose restraint. History remembers good people late because their influence is not an event. It is memory. Events end. Memory persists. Goodness works on memory, and memory lasts longer than history. History books can close. Human conscience does not. That is why good people are remembered late. But when they are remembered deeply. Cruel leaders dominate chapters. Good people shape direction. Spectacle fades. Meaning remains. And perhaps this is history's greatest irony. History remembers good people late because they were not trying to be remembered. They were trying to be human. Why do we admire cruel winners? This question is uncomfortable Because the answer does not lie in history, it lies in us. We tell ourselves that we admire success, that we respect strength, that we are simply drawn to winners. But when we look closely, we notice something disturbing. We do not just admire winners. We often admire cruel winners, those who took without asking, those who crushed resistance, those who left fear behind them. And this admiration persists even when we know the cost. Why? The first reason is psychological. Cruel winners represent certainty. In a chaotic world, certainty feels like safety. Cruel leaders act decisively. They do not hesitate. They do not doubt publicly. They say, "This is the enemy. This is the solution. Follow me." For a frightened mind, this clarity is seductive. Complexity is exhausting. Moral ambiguity is heavy. Cruel winners remove both. They simplify reality, and the human brain loves simplicity when it feels threatened. The second reason is fear. We admire cruel winners because part of us wants to be protected by them, even if that protection is violent. Cruel power promises order. Nothing will touch you. I will control the chaos. You don't need to think. This promise is ancient. It trades freedom for safety, responsibility for obedience, and many people accept that trade without realizing the price. The third reason is projection. Cruel winners live out impulses most people suppress: anger, domination, revenge. When we watch them succeed, we experience power secondhand. They do what we are told not to do, and they win. This creates a dangerous illusion that morality is the obstacle and cruelty is the shortcut. So admiration forms not despite cruelty, but because of it. The fourth reason is how history is told. History glorifies outcomes, borders drawn, empires built, wars won. It rarely lingers on suffering. Cruel winners dominate narratives because their actions are dramatic. They create events. Good people prevent them. History has always preferred spectacle to restraint. So from childhood, we are trained to associate greatness with domination. We learn the names of conquerors before we learn the names of healers. This shapes admiration long before we question it. The fifth reason is speed. Cruelty works fast. It produces immediate results. Resistance crushed, order imposed, enemies eliminated. Speed looks like competence. Morality is slower. It negotiates. It doubts. It delays gratification. In a world addicted to immediacy, slowness feels like weakness. So we admire those who act quickly, even when their speed leaves devastation behind. But there is a deeper, more troubling reason. Cruel winners relieve us of responsibility. If power is cruel, we can say, that's just how the world works. Nothing could be done. Strength always wins. This belief is comforting. It absolves us. We no longer need to ask what we would have done differently. Admiring cruel winners allows us to avoid moral effort. Because if cruelty is inevitable, then conscience is optional. This is why societies often turn cruel leaders into myths. Myths do not ask questions. They give permission. Permission to accept injustice. Permission to tolerate violence. Permission to look away. But admiration has consequences. The more we admire cruelty, the more we normalize it. The more we normalize it, the more we expect it. And eventually, the more we reproduce it. Cruel winners shape culture long after they disappear, not through laws, but through expectations. People stop asking, is this right? They start asking, will this work? And this shift is dangerous, because effectiveness without ethics leads to efficiency in destruction. Yet history shows something else. Cruel winners shine brightly and briefly. Their victories demand constant force. Their systems collapse under their own weight. Admiration fades into embarrassment. Statues fall. Narratives change. What remains is the damage. And only then do societies begin to reassess whom they admire. This is the final irony. We admire cruel winners when they seem unstoppable. We question them only after they fall. But by then, the cost has already been paid. Perhaps the real question is not why we admire cruel winners, but why we keep confusing dominance with greatness. Strength without restraint is not power. It is impulse given permission. True power does not need cruelty to prove itself. And until we learn to admire restraint as much as we admire conquest, history will keep repeating the same lesson, with new faces, new victims, and the same silence afterward. Why do we admire cruel winners? This question is uncomfortable because the answer does not lie in history, it lies in us. We tell ourselves that we admire success, that we respect strength, that we are simply drawn to winners. But when we look closely, we notice something disturbing. We do not just admire winners. We often admire cruel winners, those who took without asking, those who crushed resistance, those who left fear behind them. And this admiration persists even when we know the cost. Why? The first reason is psychological. Cruel winners represent certainty. In a chaotic world, certainty feels like safety. Cruel leaders act decisively. They do not hesitate. They do not doubt publicly. They say, "This is the enemy. This is the solution. Follow me." For a frightened mind, this clarity is seductive. Complexity is exhausting. Moral ambiguity is heavy. Cruel winners remove both. They simplify reality, and the human brain loves simplicity when it feels threatened. The second reason is fear. We admire cruel winners because part of us wants to be protected by them, even if that protection is violent. Cruel power promises order. Nothing will touch you. I will control the chaos. You don't need to think. This promise is ancient. It trades freedom for safety, responsibility for obedience, and many people accept that trade without realizing the price. The third reason is projection. Cruel winners live out impulses most people suppress: anger, domination, revenge. When we watch them succeed, we experience power secondhand. They do what we are told not to do, and they win. This creates a dangerous illusion that morality is the obstacle and cruelty is the shortcut. So admiration forms not despite cruelty, but because of it. The fourth reason is how history is told. History glorifies outcomes, borders drawn, empires built, wars won. It rarely lingers on suffering. Cruel winners dominate narratives because their actions are dramatic. They create events. Good people prevent them. History has always preferred spectacle to restraint. So from childhood, we are trained to associate greatness with domination. We learn the names of conquerors before we learn the names of healers. This shapes admiration long before we question it. The fifth reason is speed. Cruelty works fast. It produces immediate results. Resistance crushed, order imposed, enemies eliminated. Speed looks like competence. Morality is slower. It negotiates. It doubts. It delays gratification. In a world addicted to immediacy, slowness feels like weakness. So we admire those who act quickly, even when their speed leaves devastation behind. But there is a deeper, more troubling reason. Cruel winners relieve us of responsibility. If power is cruel, we can say, that's just how the world works. Nothing could be done. Strength always wins. This belief is comforting. It absolves us. We no longer need to ask what we would have done differently. Admiring cruel winners allows us to avoid moral effort. Because if cruelty is inevitable, then conscience is optional. This is why societies often turn cruel leaders into myths. Myths do not ask questions. They give permission. Permission to accept injustice. Permission to tolerate violence. Permission to look away. But admiration has consequences. The more we admire cruelty, the more we normalize it. The more we normalize it, the more we expect it. And eventually, the more we reproduce it. Cruel winners shape culture long after they disappear, not through laws, but through expectations. People stop asking, is this right? They start asking, will this work? And this shift is dangerous, because effectiveness without ethics leads to efficiency in destruction. Yet history shows something else. Cruel winners shine brightly and briefly. Their victories demand constant force. Their systems collapse under their own weight. Admiration fades into embarrassment. Statues fall. Narratives change. What remains is the damage, and only then do societies begin to reassess whom they admire. This is the final irony. We admire cruel winners when they seem unstoppable. We question them only after they fall. But by then, the cost has already been paid. Perhaps the real question is not why we admire cruel winners, but why we keep confusing dominance with greatness. Strength without restraint is not power. It is impulse given permission. True power does not need cruelty to prove itself. And until we learn to admire restraint as much as we admire conquest, history will keep repeating the same lesson, with new faces, new victims, and the same silence afterward. For a moment, leave history behind. Leave the empires, the conquerors, the famous names. They have already made their choices. Now it is your turn. If you were given power, real power, and keeping it required becoming just a little more cruel, where would you stop? Is there a line you would never cross? Or does that line move when the pressure grows? If someone told you, do this and you will win, but something inside you whispered, this is wrong, which voice would you follow? The voice of victory or the quiet voice of conscience? If doing the right thing brought you nothing, no praise, no safety, no reward, would you still do it? Is goodness for you a strategy or an identity? If everyone around you chose the easier path, if cruelty worked, if silence protected, if compromise felt safer, would you still stand alone? If no one would ever know what you chose, if history would never record it, if your name would never be remembered, would you still choose what is right? Because morality is easy when someone is watching. Morality begins when no one is. If you could do anything and no law could stop you, what would? Fear, punishment, or the need to live with yourself afterward? If one day the power disappeared, the position vanished, the crowd turned away, what would you want to remain? A person who was feared or a person who was trusted? Power moves a person forward, but morality holds a person together. And perhaps the most important question you will ever answer is not about history at all. Do you want to win or do you want to remain human? Because the moment you answer that, you are no longer observing history. You are writing your own. Now, history asks you. History is full of victories, but how many of them were worth winning? When you look at history, who do you instinctively admire? The one who conquered or the one who refused to destroy? Why do we remember conquerors by name, but remember the merciful only by idea? Why does history celebrate those who acted fast, but hesitate to honor those who chose restraint? If cruelty wins quickly and morality works slowly, which one do we call success? And why? When a city was destroyed, history wrote a chapter. But when a city was spared, why did history remain silent? How many wars that never happened were never recorded? How many lives saved were never counted? When historians say there was no other choice, was that truly a fact, or simply the choice power preferred? Why do we measure greatness by how much land was taken, not by how much suffering was prevented? If history is written by the winners, who is writing the truth? And who decides what is remembered and what is erased? When a ruler chooses mercy and loses power, do we call that failure or do we call it sacrifice? If morality had ruled history, would the world be smaller or more human? Why does history forgive cruelty when it produces order, but punish morality when it produces delay? When future generations judge our time, What will they value more? Our efficiency or our restraint? Our victories or our limits? And perhaps the most dangerous question of all, if we admire cruel winners today, what kind of history are we preparing to repeat tomorrow? Because history is not just a record of the past, it is a mirror. And every time we choose whom to admire, whom to justify, and whom to excuse, we are teaching history what to do next. So the real question is not, what did history do? But, what kind of history do we keep choosing? History will not answer these questions for you. It never has. History will show you outcomes, dates, names, victories, but it will never tell you who was right. That burden has always belonged to the living. We began this journey asking why cruelty wins quickly, why mercy looks weak, why good people seem to lose. And now, at the end, we arrive at something more uncomfortable. History does not decide what matters. We do. History remembers conquerors first because they are loud, because they move borders, because they leave ruins. But ruins are easy to record. What history struggles to record is restraint, the battle not fought, the revenge refused, the moment someone had power and chose not to use it. Those moments rarely become chapters, but they become foundations. Cruelty creates momentum, morality creates meaning. Momentum feels powerful, but it burns fast. Meaning moves slowly, but it lasts. Every empire built on fear eventually collapses under its own weight. Every system that abandons limits must escalate to survive. History shows this pattern again and again. What history does not show clearly is what comes after the collapse, after the silence, after the exhaustion. That is when morality returns, not as an ideal, not as poetry, but as necessity. Because once everything has been done, once every line has been crossed, the only question left is, how do we live with what we have become? Morality is not a tool for winning history. It is a tool for surviving it. Without morality, power has no ceiling. Without morality, victory has no meaning. Without morality, humanity dissolves into efficiency. And efficiency without ethics is simply destruction done well. History admires speed, but speed alone never saved a civilization. What saves civilizations are limits, and limits are moral decisions. Every generation believes it is smarter than the last. Every generation believes it will use power more responsibly, and every generation is tempted by the same shortcut, just this once. Just until things are stable, just until we win. History is full of those words. Graveyards are full of their results. So when we ask whether morality is practical, we are asking the wrong question. The real question is, what happens when it is gone? History gives us the answer, again and again. Collapse, trauma, silence. Morality may slow us down, but it is the only thing that stops us from becoming something we cannot undo. And this is why good people are remembered late, because they are not building monuments, they are preventing disasters. They are not shaping headlines, they are shaping consciences. History notices them only when everything else has failed. And maybe that is the final irony. The people history forgets first are often the ones who make a future possible. So when you leave this video, do not ask what history admired. Ask what it survived. Do not ask who won fastest. Ask who left something worth inheriting, because one day our time will become history, and it will not be judged by how efficient we were. It will be judged by what we refused to do when we could have done anything. If this video made you pause, if it made you uncomfortable, if it made you question what you admire, then it has done its job. And if you want to keep exploring the side of history that textbooks rush past, the quiet decisions, the moral failures, the hidden costs of victory, then subscribe to this channel. Because here we don't just ask what happened, we ask what it did to us. And as long as history keeps repeating itself, these questions will never stop being relevant. Thank you for watching. And remember, history may reward power, but humanity survives because someone chose restraint. History never truly ends. It pauses, it fades, and then it returns, wearing a different face. We spent this time asking difficult questions about power, about cruelty, about why morality so often seems to lose. And maybe the most unsettling realization is this: history is not finished with these questions. Neither are we. Every generation believes it stands at a unique moment, more advanced, more aware, more capable of avoiding old mistakes, and yet the same patterns return. Fear dressed as necessity, cruelty justified as order, silence explained as realism. History does not repeat itself because people forget facts. It repeats itself because people forget limits. Morality exists to remind us that not everything that works is acceptable, that not every victory is worth its cost, that power without restraint always demands more. What makes these questions uncomfortable is that they are never fully answered. They follow us. They appear in politics, in conflicts, in everyday choices we barely notice. And that is why history is never just about the past. It is a warning system, a mirror, a quiet voice asking, "Are we doing this again?" If this video made you pause, if it stayed with you longer than expected, then you already understand why this conversation cannot end here. Because history still has things to confess. Stories that are usually told too quickly, voices that are remembered too late, choices that are framed as inevitable, even when they were not. This channel exists to slow history down, to look at what textbooks summarize, to sit with what is usually rushed past, not to tell you what to think, but to ask better questions. And if you want to continue this journey into the hidden corners of history, the moral crossroads, the moments where humanity almost chose differently, then join us. Subscribe to the channel, not for answers, but for the next question, because the next video will not tell you who was right. It will ask what it costs to be wrong. History may close its chapters, but the conversation never ends. And if you're willing to keep asking, we'll be here. Until the next story. Until the next question.